Okay, I'm DeVan Ard. A little bit about my family history. I'm one of 3 children born to Mary Elizabeth Dumas and Jerome Cochran Ard. I have an older sister and an older brother who are both deceased. My grandparents, my maternal grandparents, are Mr. O.D. and Mattie Mae Dumas of Mobile, Alabama, because that was where my mother was born. And my father's parents were Dr. Eritas and Zaneta Bird of Ozark, Alabama, and that's where my father was born. So you can see all of my parents, lots of children, lots of aunts and uncles. All of them were born in Alabama. Just going back just a little bit, my brother's name was Jerry Ard. He was a junior and named after my father. And my sister's name was Mary Elizabeth Ard, and she was named after my mother. And as I mentioned, they're both deceased now. But we had a very good relationship in our childhood and even in our adult life. My sister and I were very close. She was 6 years older than I am, and she always took a kind of a mother attitude towards me while I was growing up. And it just extended on into our adult life and relationship. Just to go a little bit further now, I met my wife, Alice Garabrandt, here in Birmingham. She was visiting a college roommate from New Jersey, and we met one summer here in Birmingham. And while I was still in college, I was finished my junior year in college, and so we just kind of hit it off good on the first date. I had a blind date with her. And over the next 3.5 to 4 years, we just continued to communicate back and forth, sometimes long distance. And then after I got out of the service, we decided to get married. And she was one of 4 children. Her father's name was Arthur Garabrandt. Her mother's name was Mimi, is all we called her. But she had an older brother and 2 older sisters. So she was the youngest in the family. And she and her next oldest sister were very, very close. All through the years after we were married, we would visit Philadelphia. We'd go stay with them at their house. And she had a very loving family. Back a little bit, it's kind of interesting how I met Alice. She was here, as I said, visiting a friend. And I had a blind date with her. And it was a Sunday afternoon. We went on a picnic up on Shades Crest Road. And it's kind of funny, a little instance that happened. She and her friend were responsible for making the lunch. And we were going to have bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches, plus all the accessories. Well, we got there and opened the food bag up, and we looked at the sandwiches, and I said, "What did you say we were having for lunch?" And she looked kind of puzzled, said, "Bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches." I said, "Well, where's the bacon and tomato?" And there was nothing in there except lettuce and bread. So we always look back on that as kind of funny. But we, like I said, we communicated over the next 3.5 to 4 years before we were married. So we had a good solid foundation for getting married. Okay, a little bit about our wedding day. It was a wonderful day. We had a great ceremony. I was very nervous during the ceremony. I was glad when it was over with. And then the thing I remember most, of course, about our wedding day was the reception that we had. It was a full seated dinner with all the members of the wedding party being, seated for dinner. And then they had an orchestra, and all the attendees were dancing and making merry, and we just had a real good time. I think the vital ingredients for a strong marriage are, number one, to be able to listen to your partner. You have to be able to communicate, and that's a growing thing. You really don't know the person as well as you think you do before you get married, but if you establish that idea of communicating one to another, then your marriage is going to go stronger because you get to know your spouse better. So that's just a vital ingredient to, and I think the most important ingredient to a good marriage. Speaking about, well, speaking about my first job, uh, that would be in the military. When I graduated from college, I was had took advanced ROTC and graduated with a commission in the Air Force, and was immediately called into service because the Korean War was still going then. And so that, in a sense, would be my first job, and I think one of the most important jobs I've had in my life, because I was associated with a lot of different people. I was thrown into what you might call a leadership role early in life, and I learned how to get along with people, and also how to be independent. And when I was graduated, when I got out of the service, I went to work for my father. He had a business of his own, and I went to work for him, selling products that he manufactured. And this was about, this probably lasted about 3 or 4 years, and then we decided to part company. It was a mutual divorce, so to speak. And I went for another company and worked as a manufacturer's agent, selling industrial equipment and heavy equipment. And I stayed with that company, that particular company, as actually an individual and I together. And then I basically stayed in the same realm all my business career, which my business career was strictly as a salesman. And I did have a supervisory position right before I retired as vice president and general sales manager of a company. And that's how I guess my business career extended on way beyond what I thought it would. When I went to work with Gary and Jimmy, my 2 sons, in their construction business. And this was supposed to be a part-time job, so to speak, but it turned into a full-time job, for which I'm thankful. And I'm still working today with them, doing things that help them grow the business. My time in the service, I think you might elaborate on that just a little bit. When I graduated from Georgia Tech in 1951, the Korean War was still going, and since I had a commission in the service and was obligated for a 2 years active duty stint, they immediately called me into active duty. And I was assigned to be inducted in full-time military down at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. And I spent about 6 weeks there going through officer training and indoctrination, and then was assigned to a 10-month course in officer communications at Scott Air Force Base up in southern Illinois. This was an air base that was right across the river from St. Louis. And so I spent 10 months there, learning everything that they felt was necessary about communications, administration, etc. Because in Korea, there were no landlines. To say that, there was only microwave communication, so it was important that we understood exactly what was going on before we took on the leadership role. And so when I graduated from there, I went into an overseas assignment. Took a boat over to Japan. Those are 14 of the most miserable days I ever had, because if you've ever know anything about the North Pacific, it is very rough ocean. And the ship we were on was just an old World War II Liberty ship, which had a round bottom to it, and every wave or every swell that came along, the ship just rolled. But I stayed 6 for 14 days. But anyway, I got landed in Japan and was assigned to full-time duty in Korea, where I was in charge of a radio relay flight. We provided microwave communications from the forward air base back to 5th Air Force headquarters in Seoul. And so that was a very good experience. I had probably about 40 enlisted men and about 75 Korean laborers that I was responsible for for supervising, and I learned a lot about what to do and what not to do when you're in a position like that. Then when I had served my 2 years active duty, I was offered the opportunity to go another 3 years and be sent to Squadron Officer School down in Montgomery at Maxwell Air Force Base, but I was more interested in developing a business career and getting out in the world and making my way than I was in staying in the service. So I declined that, but I also had an obligation for 2 more years in the reserves. So when I came back, I got into, joined the reserves, joined the unit here in Birmingham in the reserves, and actually spent 8 years in the Air Force Reserves. And then after that, I decided that that was enough. I was discharged with the rank of captain, and that was the end of my military career. I guess just to conclude, what I think is a vital ingredient to be successful in a business career, whether you're in a supervisory position or just someone that's working on by themselves or whatever, but a vital ingredient is to be able to listen to the other person. Particularly if you're a salesman, you need to listen more than you talk. And I think if the other person realizes that you're truly interested in their situation or whatever it may be, whether they are an employee or whether it's a person you're trying to establish a relationship with for your company, it's more important to listen than it is to talk. Particularly if you get into a kind of an adversary situation. Somebody asks a question that you think is inflammatory, then just don't say anything. Just wait and listen more. But that's a vital ingredient to being successful in business. In talking about my history of my life, I think a lot of it's been built around my close friendships. And I think that's one of the most important things a person can do is to cultivate friends. I've been real fortunate in living in the same area in which I have grown up in, and developing childhood friendships that have carried over into business and spiritual friendships. And I think it's very important because friends will support you in times of adversity. You have enjoyment in good times. It's just very, very important to have a network of friends that you can fall back on at any given time. Another aspect that we hadn't talked about was my spiritual journey. I became a Christian when I was 35 years old, and have had ups and downs in my spiritual life, but have gradually grown in maturity as a Christian. To me now, that's the most important part of my life, is to have a Christian worldview, because we're bombarded on every side in all of our lives with secular things that don't really mean much or anything in the end. It's been, well, I would just say it's just been the most important thing that has occurred in my life, not apart from my getting married, but along with getting married, because a spiritual journey and a family journey should be both the same throughout your life. One thing you always think about when you talk about spiritual things is life and death. What happens when you die, or what do I think about death? Well, I think about it every time one of my friends dies, but I don't dwell on it, because I know that when I die, I'm going to be with God. He's sovereign in my life now. He'll be sovereign in my life when I die. And so death is a reality, but not something to be worried over or something that dominates your thinking. Well, you know, in talking about spiritual journey for me, I kind of think about how important it is to be a good father and to impart an example to my children. Because the most important thing is a spiritual example. But also, being a good dad is not solely a spiritual responsibility. Being a good dad involves being with your children at all times when they need you, and then when they don't need you. The most important thing to me, and I know it's different with some people in raising boys and girls, but since I had only boys, I think the most important part of being a good dad was to spend time with them. And there was no activity all during their growing years that I didn't participate in. I remember we had a little program down at the YMCA called Tumbling Tots. And when DeVan and Gary were, my two oldest sons, were maybe like just 3 or 4 years old, we in that Tumbling Tots program, and I'd go down to the YMCA with them a couple of times a week, and we'd do things like that. But that carried in a lot of families when a child's only 3 or 4 years old, they're still under their mother's wing. But during our time together, in our lifestyle, we were pretty much associated very closely with their father, and with their mother too, but in activities and doing things that the boys and men like to do, we did a lot together. Another thought about what I've learned from being a dad was just the same, was the most important thing for being a dad is what we talked about before, being able to listen. It's, I remember a lot of times when one of my children would say something I didn't agree with, or I would say something they didn't agree with, and they'd say, why? And I would say, because I said so. Well, I kind of regret over a period of time doing that, but I didn't do it enough to where it alienated them. A little more about my spiritual journey. I think it's so important to understand the freedom that we have in this country to even develop a spiritual journey. The one thing I love so much about the United States of America is the personal freedom that every individual has, both to succeed and to fail. Liberty and freedom go hand in hand. If we lose our liberty, we lose our freedom, and vice versa. But in this country, if we stay by the Constitution, and that's so important, we're always going to be free. We're always going to have that liberty that causes us to be free. The country's changed somewhat. I really didn't think too much about politics until I got out of the service and got married. And then we became very active in political realm, because that was the time when the Cold War with Russia was going and communism was growing, and we developed, I say we, that is my wife and I, or Alice and I, we developed a worldview that's based on conservative values. That is, when I say conservative, I mean that the individual is the most important thing there is in a society, and not the state itself. And that has shaped my worldview politically, but it's being tested now. There seems to be more and more people leaning towards a liberal point of view. That is, when I say liberal, that is depending on the state to take care of you in case of adversity, and really not giving you the opportunity to succeed, because the incentive and the challenge is not there. But it's still the greatest country in the world. People want to come here, and we have what everybody else in the world wants, but won't admit it. You know, something we really hadn't talked about too much, we've kind of hit on it, but not really spelled it out, is the importance on how we handle our financial affairs. How, not only how we handle them, but how we teach our children to handle them. If there's one piece of advice I would give, and I've always given to my family, is to not spend more than you have. Not only not spend more than you have, but more than you have the ability to have. That's what's wrong with the country right now financially, is people we've elected to office to take care of us financially, or to take our finances and put them to the best use, have spent more than they have coming in. And so it's so important to live within your means. Don't let pleasure rule your financial decisions. Think about what good you can do with your finances. Just a little aside issue on doing that is always give the 10% that you have, that God has given to you, give back to Him. Actually, I believe you should give more than 10%, but that's what the Bible tells us that we're obligated to the very least to give. So that's an important aspect of finance. Just to sum up, be frugal, don't spend more than you have, and pay a tribute back to God. You know, while we were talking about finances, finances kind of leads me into an area of how I would handle adversity in life, and that's because finances and the mishandling of finances can create so much adversity. I think statistics show that the biggest cause of division in a family is wrong-headedness about financing, and creates adversity that's extremely difficult to overcome. But financial adversity or any kind of catastrophe or adversity of any kind is completely under the control of God. What I'm trying to say is I believe in the sovereignty of God, that He not only created everything, but He knows everything. That is, He's omniscient, and that He will be sovereign in our life, and it will be for our good. I believe that God creates adversity just for that reason, to cause us as Christians to grow and to depend more on Him. If we have a life of ease and with no adversity, then we're going to just be looking to depend on ourselves. So I think it's very important to look to a being or a power, and I kind of say that just as a generic thing, but look to God Himself to take care of all the adversity in our life. And that would be, I would want to pass that on to my children. I think I've seen that in them, that they have handled adversity. They've been a little self-sufficient, more so than I would like, but in handling adversity. But still, I think in the end they've depended on God and know that He is in control of their life. And I guess that kind of brings us down the road here about getting older, since that was the reason for doing this tape, was to make some sort of record of my life history. And the only bad part about getting older is the body wears out. But the good part about getting older is you develop maturity in your thinking and wisdom, and that's the Bible says, get wisdom and you have everything. So I think that the best part about growing older is the wisdom that you gain, the maturity you can give to the generations that are coming along. As long as we're, talking about getting older, we need to probably consider how I'd like to be remembered, because there will be a day when I will be remembered, not as a living person, but as one that has gone to be with His Savior. But I would like to be remembered as a person that was that supported my family, put them first in my secular life, that I was a giving person. I was willing to give more than I took, and there was just a person that supported not only his family, but everything good that's worth supporting. And I could go on and on about that. Not necessarily that I have all those attributes, but those are the things I'd like to be remembered for. As kind of a closing remark, I would like to say that I'm confident, and I say this with all sincerity, I'm confident that my family will be together in heaven. And I know that they have told me that they believe and trust in Jesus Christ as their personal Savior, and I believe that they have, and I'm willing. I'm looking forward to seeing them in heaven when we can have a life that will be no adversity. Everything will be light and will be truth and will be good.